Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and today we're looking at 3 stories from Malicious Compliance. This story comes to us from Absurd and Nihilistic, yet another new manager facing the consequences of their actions story. Let's jump right in. I'll keep the details vague as possible because I'm still with this organization. I work for a government department. We have offices and locations all over the state. I'm based out of a city that's a 2 and a bit hour train ride to our head office. At the time, I was working in a team that had members working remotely all across the state, looking after policy, process, and quality assurance. Our old manager had gone and gotten himself promoted for being genuinely brilliant at his role. So our new manager, Steve, was hired in from the glorious world of banking, and he was here to whip us lazy public servants into shape. A few days after he began his role, he called us all to a teleconference to inform us he wanted all of us to be at the head office 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for an all-day in-person team meeting. He wanted to see us in meat space to size us up, understand what we were doing, and see where we weren't keeping up with the private sector. As I mentioned, due to the nature of the work we were doing, we were all across the state. So in person, whole team meetings were rare, and if they occurred at all, they were booked weeks in advance. We were all adept at video conferencing long before COVID. Some of us tried to tell our new high flyer manager that almost none of us were in the same city as him, and to be there on such short notice would mean travel expenses, meal allowances, overtime, etc. He didn't seem to care, and told us in no uncertain terms to just be at the head office tomorrow at 8 a.m. before abruptly hanging up. Now, I should explain something. I'm one of a handful of union delegates in our department. I know our award back to front. Specifically, the sections dealing with travel, allowances, and overtime. So I engaged malicious compliance mode. If Steve wanted us there, fine, but it'll cost him. So I quickly went about emailing my team what Steve had done by requiring us to be in the head office at 8 a.m. and what to do. Because we'd have to travel outside our normal work hours, our workday clock started ticking the moment we left our homes and only stopped once we got home. Some of our team traveled overnight. They were entitled to overtime travel, a dinner allowance and accommodation for the night, and the same returning. As someone traveling in the morning before 7 a.m., I was entitled to a breakfast allowance, lunch allowance, and if I got home after 9 p.m., a dinner allowance also. So I left my house at 5 a.m. to catch the only train that would get me there in time. The train was running slightly behind, but I made it in time. So my first 3 hours of my workday down and I'd done no work. After a brief period of us introducing ourselves to Steve, he proceeded to spend the next 4 hours telling us about all of the things he did at the bank, how he made so much money for them, where they'd sent him as a holiday bonus, how we're all stuck in the past in the public service, the work he'd seen wasn't up to private sector standards, etc. He had all the cocksureness of a finance bro who had always failed upwards because others had picked up his slack. By 3 p.m., my entire team were into overtime pay territory, and Steve was just warming up with his non-charm offensive. About 3 hours go by with Steve verbally patting himself on his back, deeply in love hearing his own voice, but all I hear is cha-ching, cha-ching. Steve decided that 5 p.m. was a good time to finish up. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at his watch, and unceremoniously said, "That's all for today, go home now," and walked out. After I and a few others gave a few awkward shrugs to each other, we all packed up and started to make our separate ways home after doing no work all day. I myself got to the train station pretty quickly and saw a train was leaving soon that would get me home around 8 p.m. Or I could catch the all stations train and get home closer to 9:30 p.m. You know what? No matter how fast I could run, I just couldn't catch that earlier train. Darn, I'd just have to catch that all stations train and be on the clock for another hour and a half, plus have my dinner paid for. Such rotten luck. I submitted my claims the next day, 4.5 hours at double rate, my train tickets, my taxi fares to and from the train station, my breakfast, lunch, and dinner allowances. For me alone, it was close to a $500 expense claim. The rest of my team followed suit and ensured they claimed everything too. Steve tried to fight us on approval for the claims, but quickly learned that unlike in the world of banking, most public servants are union, and we'd raise living heck if he denied our award guaranteed allowances. His all-day Steve Fest symposium blew a good $6,000 hole in his budget. Needless to say, while Steve was our manager, he never required us to attend an in-person meeting again. Video conferencing was just fine. He only lasted 6 months before leaving for new opportunities. He just went back to his old job at the bank. Guess he was the one who couldn't keep up. Jumping down to the comment section in this one, there's one from a user called W. Nichols. It says, Steve's biggest mistake was not understanding the climate of your department and prejudging everyone as knowing nothing. Arrogance is the reason some leaders aren't adaptable. But as long as Steve stays in his lane at the private company that allows him to blame his shortcomings on employees, he'll prosper in ignorance. It seems to me Steve's whole personality was, I am so special, and my crap don't stink. He really did embody the term seagull management. He flew in, he made a lot of noise, he crapped all over everything, and then he took off again. This story comes to us from Sarah Sill. You want to send me home? Sounds good. Let's jump right in. So I was a sarcastic and easily annoyed guy in my 20s, and this often didn't help me get along with older or corporate types. I was working at a certain pumpkin-colored big box home improvement store one spring, in the flooring department. It was just starting to get warm out and the store didn't have much AC. So I was looking forward to a magical date where certain employees were allowed to switch their pants for shorts. Problem is that we had a new department manager, I'll call him Dick, who was aggressively chasing a promotion to assistant manager, then store manager. He thought he could accomplish that by being a super by-the-book hard butt and being relentlessly metrics focused. This translated into a manager who was a know-it-all, micromanaging dick. Anyway, I'm scheduled to open at 5 a.m. on the fabled day of cooler bottom wear, and I walk in all light and airy and bare-legged. Dick, who was an overnight manager the previous night, saw me and threw a fit. "Why are you out of uniform?" he asked. "I'm not. I can wear shorts starting today," I proclaimed. "Not your position in your department. Who told you that you could?" he retorted. "The employee's handbook and standard operating procedures? I can show you if you don't believe me," I offered. "I know the SOP, and your department doesn't get to wear shorts. That's only garden. Go home and change right now," he demanded, face getting redder from my defiance. "Okay, Dick, if that's how you want to play it, I'll be back in an hour," I sighed. "Maybe the loss of an hour of pay will teach you something." So I know better. The reason I know better is because I'm one of the weirdos who actually read the entire standard operating procedure document, the employee handbook, which is actually just a subsection of the standard operating procedures, and I really hate being wrong. So I checked the SOP before doing anything different day to day. In my store, the SOP was like invoking God. If the SOP said so, that won every single argument. So I go home, change into pants, but bring my shorts back to work with me. By now, Dick's shift is over, and I asked the new morning manager on duty, Darren, to meet with me. "Why? What's up?" "Oh, just an SOP issue." "Oh, okay. Give me like 10 minutes. So I swung by my desk and printed out several things. One, my latest pay stub that included my official job title and department number. 2, the company directory that listed the department names and their associated numbers. 3, the standard operating procedure that dealt with when and which departments and employees can wear shorts. 4, the annual email from the regional VP confirming which departments could wear shorts starting when, which also included the line, "And this letter is to be posted at the time clock between the dates of this and this." 5, the SOP detailing the company transportation and mileage reimbursement policy. 6, a Google Maps route that mirrored the route I take to and from work with the total mileage highlighted. So I meet with Darren and explained what happened, and handed him each page in turn as they became relevant. At the end, we agreed that I was right on every single account and asked me what I wanted. 1. I wanted the time. I was turned away before I could clock in, so I wanted to be paid starting at 5 a.m. Feel free to check the CCTV if you want to confirm when I arrived. 2. I want the mileage, because Dick sent me on essentially a company errand with my own vehicle through no fault of my own. 3. I want this letter posted at the clock like it says it's supposed to be. 4. I want you to talk to Dick about this, because I told him this was the SOP before he sent me home. 5. I'm changing back into my shorts. All of that sounds more than fair. Get the paperwork for the clock adjustment and mileage to me today and I'll sign it. The letter mysteriously went missing from the time clock the next day, but I replaced it every day until I happened to see Dick angrily snatch it off the board and throw it away. I reported that as well, and the letter stopped going missing. He didn't talk to me much, and I was transferred to another department a month later, so all in all, win-win, I think. This is another example of a person who has absolutely no business being in a management position. One of the hallmarks of a good manager is somebody who can look at what they said, admit their mistakes, and then make the changes needed to make things right. Crapping on people all day doesn't make you a good manager, it makes people resent you. And once your employees resent you, well, there's really no coming back from that. This story comes to us from Rugby Player 96. Doesn't matter if the case is closed or not? Okay then, let's jump right in. I work in a call center that primarily deals with the public, with issues or queries they have, and whilst we can deal with a lot ourselves, there are a lot of things we must either log for another department to look into, or transfer them across to that department. For example, if someone calls about a broken street lamp, they get transferred across to the street lighting team. But if someone calls about a pothole, we have to log it for the highway team to fix it. Some departments don't have an internal number for the caller to get transferred across to, or a number we can call to speak to that department. And one of those departments is the enforcement department. Of all the systems and departments we use and liaise with, the trickiest one we deal with is the enforcement system. Basically, ranging from food safety to the environment, there were multiple teams that enforced things, and all of these issues had to be logged on this system. For example, if someone called to report their neighbor for being too loud, that had to get logged on the system for the noise enforcement team to investigate. But we had to arrange for letters to be sent out about it. If someone reported an abandoned car, we logged it, and the environment enforcement team went out to investigate. If someone said they got food poisoning from a restaurant, we logged it, and the food safety team investigated it, and so on. The reason why it was so tricky was because if you missed a step, it didn't get logged properly, and it didn't go to the correct team, which meant that someone would complain to your manager about it. And crucially, this was a legal system, which meant that if the issue escalated to court, whatever you wrote in your notes could be used in the court proceedings. This wasn't a second nature, eyes closed kind of system. You needed to be concentrating because something you log can bite you in the butt a month later. For example, when someone calls to say that they haven't received a letter and it turns out you didn't send it in the first place. The way it worked was that a case was logged, which meant that it was open, and it got assigned to an officer like pulling a name out of a hat. And throughout the time that it was open, if someone called back to give you more information about the case, you could update it, and that update went directly to the investigating officer. And then, when the investigation had finished, the case was closed by that officer. Basically, once a case was assigned to an officer, they had to see it through from start to finish. Whether it was deciding if a noise complaint was justified or going through black bags that were reported as fly tipping to see if they could find anything that tied someone to that rubbish, and so on. It wasn't as simple as that though, because there were cases that had been open for years with multiple updates. There were multiple cases that had been opened and closed between the same properties for the same reasons, or someone had called about something and you weren't 100% sure it should be logged or not, etc. I'm not sure how my colleagues dealt with those situations, but whenever I got a call like that, I just emailed the investigating officer just to explain the situation and ask for advice. and CC'd in their colleagues just in case the investigating officer was off. Or I just emailed the team to ask if they wanted me to log it as a new case or not, since if it was an ongoing situation with multiple cases for the same thing, many officers may have dealt with it, and they may have not wanted me to log it as a new case. I didn't see an issue with it because they either emailed me back with an answer or they didn't reply but logged it themselves after they'd looked into it. But one day, I got a thorny email from a thornier senior environmental officer, basically telling me off and telling me not to send them emails anymore because the system was there to be used. I emailed him back, explaining that it wasn't that simple, because there were tricky cases that I needed help with, and I didn't want to update an old case or log a case if I didn't need to not unnecessarily add to the caseloads of the officers. And he replied back, reiterating that I shouldn't send any more emails, and finished it off by telling me to either update the case whether it was open or closed, or open a new case. Cue malicious compliance. From that day forward, I did not send another email. If I got a call about an issue, and the last time the issue was raised was in 2017, I updated the 2017 case. If I was on the fence about logging something as a new case or not, I just logged it anyway. If I checked the last case and the investigating officer had left, I updated it anyway. I was unaware of this, but when I told people that the investigating officer would call them back, like they typically did after we asked them to in our updates, they would call us a couple of weeks later to ask why they hadn't received a call. And my colleagues would have to raise a new case for them because the one I updated was closed. The officers also suddenly had an influx of new cases, because every time I updated a closed case, it reopened, which added to their caseload. The system they used worked on dates and caseloads. For example, if I asked them to call someone or inspect a property in my update, the system generated a time frame for them to complete that action by. But if they were too busy to do something I'd asked them to do, it went red, which counted against them. Also, for example, if they had 4 cases open and then they closed 3 and they'd gone down to 1, they'd go back up to 4 again if I updated 3 of their old cases. So, based on the system, they were not doing their jobs properly because they constantly had open cases. This put their stats through the floor. This went on for ages, and one day I was hauled into an office by my manager, and waiting for me was his manager, the senior enforcement officer. His manager, an HR advisor for me and HR. They told me that I was doing call avoidance, gross misconduct, purposefully misadvising callers and not triaging calls correctly. From what they were saying and the paperwork they had with them, I knew it was a "you're fired" meeting. HR asked me if there was anything I wanted to say. So I looked at the enforcement manager, pointed at the senior enforcement officer, and said, "He told me to do it." The enforcement manager looked at me, looked at the senior enforcement manager, looked at me again, and then asked me to clarify what I meant. I explained it all from start to finish, making it clear that when I was sending emails, I always asked for advice and offered to log a case for the enforcement team if they wanted me to. And that before the email from the senior enforcement officer, my emails either were not replied to, but someone logged it for me, or someone replied to me to tell me to log a new case or to not log a new case. The enforcement manager sighed and then asked me if I could send him that email, so I quickly left, went back to my desk, sent the email thread to him, and came back into the office. He read the email, sighed deeper than he did before, and then asked us all to leave, but asked the senior enforcement officer to stay. And I left with a massive crap-eating grin on my face because I knew that I would keep my job. The fallout was pretty big because the IT team had to go in and manually close all the open cases so that the stats for the enforcement officers would go back to normal. The payroll department had to backdate all the months that the stats were messed up so that the performance bonus matched what would have happened had I not put their stats down. I didn't know they had performance bonuses until afterwards. And the senior enforcement officer got demoted to an enforcement officer based on their new email signature. A couple of weeks later, when the enforcement manager was less busy, he emailed me to basically say that he gives me permission to go back to emailing the enforcement team about cases, but I should use my own judgment. If I think I could justifiably get away with not logging something on the system, as in I could explain to my manager why I didn't think I should have logged it, then I shouldn't log it. And that logic would cut down the amount of emails I had to send to the enforcement teams. No one got fired, but someone got demoted, and a lot of work happened in the background to fix what I did. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Your Wise Old Friend. It says, when the higher-ups tell you something, make sure to meticulously document that fact, and to keep copies of it so that you can refer to it. They will mercilessly plow you into the ground if it suits them in the moment. So you keep records and, should the need arise, you point at the person responsible and say, he or she made me do it, upon which statement you produce the goods. If it's not up to you to question management, it's not up to you to suffer the consequences of their decisions. This is something that we've mentioned in many previous videos, that when you're told to do something that just doesn't sound right, no matter what it is, ask your boss to give it to you in writing. There's a couple of things that will happen when you ask this. Either they look at what they told you and realize that they've made a mistake and they change it, or they give it to you in writing and you have backup when the crap hits the fan. Always cover your butt. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.